The path to the dark side is wide.
Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force are they. Easily they flow.
And many are there who find it.
Is the dark side stronger?
No, easier, more seductive.
I will be the most powerful Jedi ever.
All who gain power are afraid to lose it.
I will even learn to stop people from dying.
Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is my theological analysis for Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. I'm excited to dive into this movie because I've been rewatching the prequel trilogy for the first time in many years, and it's because December is just around the corner and Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker will be here before we even realize it. And I got some videos planned in December, so I'm trying to catch up on my Star Wars to get some of those videos ready to go. Gonna bring in a special guest and it's gonna be awesome, but I couldn't help but sit here in front of the camera and talk after watching Episode 3, which I go back to Episode 3 being the best of the prequel trilogy. It was tough to get to the prequels again after all this time. The first one's a little bit boring. The second one, Anakin is so whiny and crying the entire time. I mean, he's crying about how Obi-Wan is trying to hold him back.
He's jealous. He's holding me back.
Boo-hoo, and on he cries. And all I can think is, Padme's attracted to this guy? Padme is like this queen, okay? She's this senator now. She is a strong, fierce, independent woman, and here is a snot-nosed little kid crying. I think the Episode 1 version of him was more mature than the Episode 2 version of him. And let's take out the stupid, corny lines and the bad dialogue, and let's just look at the fact of how whiny he was. I mean, I just couldn't get over it. And he's still a little bit whiny in Episode 3, but what I liked about Episode 3 is it decided to go past that a little bit. And we get a little bit more into Anakin's head, into Anakin's fears, and how he's utterly standing on nothing. He is confused. He's torn in more than one direction. He's torn by the path of the Jedi, and he's torn by following the Chancellor, a friend and a mentor. He's torn because he constantly is still feeling the whininess that nobody trusts me, nobody wants to promote me, they're just afraid of my power, boo-hoo-hoo.
How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
And yet, even the Chancellor has this epic line right here.
All who gain power are afraid to lose it.
And what has Anakin's focus been on? It's been on power. Why has it been on power? Because of fear. He's utterly afraid of loss. And because he's afraid of loss, he's on this quest for power. Now, he was already whiny and stuff like that, but plagued with dreams in Episode 2 about the death of his mother. And his mother dies. So he goes on this vengeance spree and destroys the Sand People. He was afraid, the fear was confirmed, and he totally dark-sided it and wiped out those Sand People. Now, Episode 3, at the beginning, we get him having dreams of Padme dying. His beloved, his wife, who is now actually pregnant with his child. Doesn't realize it's children yet, but he knows he's gonna be a dad. And this fear of losing her goes back to this fear he already had and was confirmed with his mom, and now it's like 10 times more. So if all who gain power are afraid to lose it, this is exactly where Anakin is, because that's exactly where his eye is. It actually reminds me of Peter walking out on the water to Jesus. When Peter said, hey, call out to me so I can walk out to you in the water, and Jesus said, come. When he stepped out of the boat, his eyes were on Jesus, and he was walking on the water. But when he started to look at the wind and the waves, it freaked him out, and he sank, and Jesus caught him and said, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? It's interesting. In the Amplified Bible and the Bible app, it adds a little note to that verse. Jesus says, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? The note it adds, allow yourself to be drawn in 2 directions. Now that's deep, and that's exactly where Anakin is. Rather than having his eye on the Force, rather than having his eye where it should be, he's torn in 2 directions. Especially after the fascinating conversation with Palpatine, talking about Darth Plagueis, and talking about this whole idea that he figured out how to create life with the midichlorians, and beyond that,
He could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
Now this keeps Anakin drawn in too, but that's the aim of the enemy. In 1 Peter 5, it talks about how the devil is like a roaring lion seeking whom he can devour. And one of the key things it says there is, stand firm in your faith, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Problem with Anakin is, what faith was he having? Where was the firm ground for him to stand on? This is where he was like Peter from the Bible. By not having his eyes on Jesus, he sank right through the water, and that's where Anakin is. He's looking at the effects of the storm rather than keeping his focus on what it should be on, so he's torn in more than one direction. So here comes Palpatine, Darth Sidious, the Emperor. Here he comes, this roaring lion seeking to devour Anakin. And Anakin, who is this prophesied the one to bring balance to the Force, does have the double portion of the Force more than anybody else. He has the ability in himself to resist Palpatine, and Palpatine will have to flee. And Palpatine will be defeated before him. The problem is his feet weren't planted firmly. Now, part of that is he's looking at the Jedi, and he's looking at the hypocrisy of the Jedi. And I think what we see in the Jedi, in their rules and in their regulations, is they got caught up in the rules and in the regulations. Well, we can't be slaves to attachment, so no, you can't be in love. I think the Jedi are trying to suppress. This is bad, this is sin, and we can't feel this. And what's this leading to? I mean, it's leading to all this hypocrisy that I think Anakin is witnessing. And Anakin is confused by it. He has all these feelings in him, and he ends up feeling guilty when he feels angry. He ends up feeling guilty when he feels afraid. And when you're in that guilt cycle and that condemnation cycle, it starts to continue to heat up that anger, it heats up that confusion, and onward it goes. So here's Anakin, again, looking in the wrong place and looking at the hypocrisy of the Jedi, while trying to obtain power because he's afraid of losing Padme. You know what's interesting is Yoda said something very, very difficult to him at the beginning of this movie. Yoda said,
The fear of loss is a path to the dark side. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose.
Which, that's kind of a hard saying, but here's the interesting thing about it. What if Anakin had done that? What if he had trained himself to let go of what he feared to lose? Does that mean he'd divorce Padme and never raise his kids? I don't think so. But I think there's a degree in his heart where if he were to let go of that fear and stand firm in his faith and not be about seeking power, but about quieting himself to listen to the Force, then he might have been in a whole different situation.
But how am I to know the good side from the bad?
You will know when you are calm, at peace.
But instead, it was because his mind kept ramping up with all the scenarios of fear. His mind kept ramping up with everything that could go wrong. He actually became the self-fulfilling prophecy of what he saw in Padme dying. She would have lived had he had learned to calm his mind, had he had learned to quiet himself and listen to the Force. Had he had stayed the course and stood the ground on the light side, Padme would not have died because he would have been at her side when she was giving birth. It's letting himself get twisted by this enemy, getting twisted by this enemy's philosophy, where he even said, I can overthrow the Emperor and we can rule the galaxy as we see fit. This seemed like a good idea because he let himself get so twisted because he didn't have anything firm to stand on because his eye was in the wrong place. You know, in our lives, it could be that easy to not resist the devil because we're letting ourselves be torn in more than one direction. When Peter walked on the water, he let himself be pulled in another direction. Rather than his eyes being focused on Jesus, where when his eyes were there, the impossible was being done. But as soon as he looked around at the storm, the natural overcame him and he sank. He needed to keep his eyes on Jesus, keep his faith firm there and steady, and he would have remained above the waves. Sometimes, like the Jedi, our churches could get so religious they lose the idea of relationship. And sometimes that can be confusing and it can be angering, but if we have our eye there looking at where humans aren't perfect, because whether they're in the church or whether they're anywhere else, humans will just never be perfect. So when our eye is on the example of man and on man, of course we're going to see the hypocrisy, and of course it's going to lead to some confusion and fear and anger and those things that lead to the dark side. But if we keep our eyes on Jesus, the only one who lived it out perfectly, and seek to quiet our minds, be still, and seek his example out and put our eyes on him, then we can walk on those waves and we will see the impossible. When he saw that warning, when Anakin saw the warning of his wife dying, it was more so of a warning to his own heart to get it right on the inside, to put his eyes where they need to be so that he could be firm and he could stand against the enemy and resist him, and that enemy would flee. But he didn't take it that way. He let the fear in. He let the fear cloud him, and so he went under the waves and allowed himself to be twisted up by the dark side.
I'll never turn to the dark side. You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
What did you think of Star Wars Episode 3? I literally just watched it and just sat down in front of this camera to talk because I'm like, this is kind of interesting. What did you think of Star Wars Episode 3? Do you have a favorite prequel movie? Do you despise the prequels, but do you still see kind of an interesting plot there in the Skywalker story and the story of the Force? Let's talk about that in the comments. While you're there, hit the subscribe button to become a Durbanian. Hit that bell by the subscribe button so you're notified the next time I do another theological analysis, movie review, ranking video, or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.